All right, there we go. So LaRissa Lawrie is a Relevate member interested in the effects of technology and media. She is currently a journalism PhD student at the Missouri School of Journalism at the University of Missouri. Her research focuses on misinformation, emerging media, and health. She has a BA and MA in strategic communication from Wichita State University. Before coming to the University of Missouri, LaRissa worked in a variety of media roles, including technical marketing, social media marketing, communication strategy, copywriting, and journalism. She's also regularly teaching guest lectures on strategic thinking principles and is an advocate for bringing opportunities for innovation to underserved populations. Our second speaker today is Dr. Abbie Goldberg, who is a professor in the Department of Psychology at Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts, where she also currently serves as the Director of Women and Gender Studies. She is also the current holder of the Jan and Larry Landry Endowed Chair. She received her BA in Psychology from Wesleyan University and an MA in Psychology and a PhD in Clinical Psychology from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Her research examines diverse families, including LGBTQ parent families and adoptive parent families. She is the author of over 140 peer-reviewed articles and 3 books and is the co-editor of 4 books, which, Abbie, your book gets delivered tomorrow is what Amazon told me. So congrats on your new book.
What's funny about that is that people have gotten my book before I've gotten my book. I've received several pictures that people have sent me and I said, I didn't even get my book, so.
Wow, we should have ordered one for you.
Even more excited when I see it.
Yes. Awesome. Well, let's kick off by turning the time over to LaRissa to teach us about using Twitter. And as you're going, feel free to put questions in the chat that we can answer during our Q&A period.
Okay. Hi, my name is LaRissa Lawrie, and I'm a journalism PhD student at the University of Missouri. And I'm going to talk to you all today about using Twitter effectively to share your expertise. So the first thing that I'll start off with is that if you're here, I'm assuming that you want to use Twitter purposely and strategically for scholarship, expertise, sharing knowledge. If you want to use Twitter professionally or for fun, that's very much a personal decision. And so I wanted to point out that a lot of these are best practices for building a reputation and a following around who you are and what you know. And so that is the assumption that I'm making about all of you. So first, I wanted to address the billionaire in the room. Do you need to worry about Elon Musk buying Twitter? And the answer is no. There are many ways to engage in public scholarship, and a lot of these principles are going to be translatable to other social media platforms. Also, with things like buying a large tech startup like this one, there are many different ways that the deal could stop. And so it's not something that we should be focusing on. We should learn how to use tools effectively that are available to us now, because those skill sets will be useful in other platforms if the need should arise. The other thing is I want to clarify what public scholarship is. Public scholarship is the work of researchers created for audiences outside of the academy. And why does it matter? It connects the academy and the public and distributes knowledge to the public and decision makers. This is one of the reasons that I'm very passionate about public scholarship. Is a misinformation and technology researcher. I think that the easiest way to make a difference is to connect with the public about my research. And then why do it on Twitter? Twitter has been called the public square. It is one of the easiest platforms to share information, start conversations, and connect. In marketing, we call this an easy lift because most anyone can start a Twitter account and share information that is useful to other people. The other unique thing about Twitter is that information disseminators, so organizations, journalists, local governments, politicians, they exist publicly on Twitter, and you can connect with them by tweeting at them. And by generating a following, you are more likely to influence or get in front of these people. So trust me, and I'm an expert. So how do we convey that we're experts on Twitter? I think Dr. Goldberg does a fantastic job. So a little bit of the basics. Your Twitter profile needs a real photo of you. When we're asking journalists and other people to distribute our research or expertise or knowledge, they need to feel like they're connecting with a real person, not someone behind a cartoon. And so when you have a photo, you are including social proof. The other thing that you need to have is a header photo, which is the books at the top of her profile. And this is both a way to show off your personality, that social proof, because these are books that are really relevant to Dr. Goldberg's research. It also shows that you're taking Twitter seriously. The other thing is that you need to have your full name unless you were using Twitter for fun or there is a legitimate reason to go by a moniker instead. Again, this helps people understand who you are, what your reputation is. It also lets people Google you and find things like your publications. The other thing that I see a lot is that we want to use an appropriate username. It is very hard when lots of people share your name. There are other LaRissa Lawries in the world, so I go by Lawrie Creative, but you want something that is the same across platforms ideally, and is as close to your name as you can get it reasonably, because when people want to search for Dr. Goldberg, they're going to type her name into Twitter, and so having a good @ also helps with that. And last, for your bio, you want to demonstrate your expertise. A lot of times I see my professors who just have professor at such and such, and that doesn't really tell you what that person does or why we should talk to them. And so Dr. Goldberg does a really good job here by saying that she studies diverse families, sexualities, and genders, and that she's a clinical professor, psychology professor at Clark University. This is someone that I could see myself reaching out to about a news story regarding those things. She also includes her pronouns, which is really helpful. And last, Dr. Goldberg also has links both to her university by saying at Clark University and to her personal website. This is free advertising, and it also increases your reputation online. If you don't have a personal website, I would really encourage you to make one. They're very easy and cheap, and feel free to ask me, send me an email later and we can talk more about those. So not just that Dr. Goldberg is doing this well, here are some examples of scholars that I think are really doing great things on their Twitter profile. On the left is Dr. Bidera, and she's an early career scholar. She graduated with her PhD in 2021, but is able to use Twitter effectively for public scholarship. Versus Dr. Opara, who has much more experience and affiliations. And you can see the different ways that they're utilizing their ads, their header profiles, their bios, and their links to communicate different things. So for instance, a link tree has many different links that are relevant to people who are trying to connect with Opara, which shows that she's been in the game a long time. She probably has someone helping her, versus Dr. Bidera, who is showing her personal website. And so how do we know if we're doing a good job? The first thing I would say is that we want to conduct a strategy audit. And the first thing we want to look at are, what are your goals? Are you trying to increase the amount of citations on your publications? Are you trying to connect with local community organizations? Does your Twitter profile communicate those goals? And so the most important thing when we think about social media use is that we don't want to have any wasted effort. We want to identify a specific goal and utilize Twitter for that goal. The other thing is to do a comparison. How does your profile and the profile of accounts you admire compare? And this is a really easy way to determine some wins and opportunities. So which tweets of yours are doing well, what time are they posted, what is the content that is doing well, which tweets are not getting engagement, what are some opportunities to improve? I think that it's really helpful when we have case studies or visuals, at least for me. And so Brené Brown is one of the most well-known public scholars, I would argue, right now. So let's look at her Twitter profile. What is her Twitter profile telling us her strategy is, right? Researcher, storyteller, Texan, right? This is someone who is so well known that she doesn't have to have a bio. However, she is promoting her new book, I believe, or yeah, I think it's her book, on her header. And so she's using it in a promotional way, right? She's posting graphics like this one, your calling is your calling. It's not a conference call. So she's using it as her tweets as resources to entice her audience to use her or to get on her podcast, right? To listen to her podcast. Here's another example. She is highlighting someone that she interviewed on her podcast and a really important quote that might be useful to her audience. And so she's promoting herself and her scholarship and providing resources to her followers. She's also highlighting important events in time as a woman who cares about empathy and vulnerability. And so things like highlighting really big events, and then also promoting her new Atlas of the Heart on HBO Max. So she's tweeting promotional photos of her. She's indicating that she has new podcast episodes up. She is connecting with her audience. And so overall, if you ask me what would be Brené Brown's Twitter strategy, it is to promote the resources that she creates to her followers. And this is very much in line with what we see with her talks that she gives as well. And so how do we tell if our tweets are doing well? The easiest way to do that is through analytics. And first, I'm going to tell you how to get to your analytics. On your Twitter homepage is the More button. You're going to click that. And then you're going to click analytics, and then a page like the one on the right is going to show up, which is going to describe your 28-day summary, the amount of tweets, the amount of impressions, which are how many people viewed your tweets, the amount of people that looked at your profile, and how many followers you currently have and whether that's up or down. If you want to get into the nitty-gritty, you can click view tweet activity. And then it will come up with a page like this, which has your impressions as a graph over a 28-day period. It also will show your tweets, all of the tweets that you have in the last 28 days and their impressions, the engagements and the engagement rate. And the engagement rate is the number of impressions or the number of engagements, which is like likes or retweets or things like that, divided by the number of impressions, and that's your engagement rate. And generally in marketing, we try to shoot for anything over 5%. So this tweet by Relevate is doing really good. And then one thing that I like is the graphs that are on the right that show the link clicks, the retweets without comments, and the likes, because this really helps visualize like what tweet did really good. Were there any days that people tended to interact more? All right, so followers, following. So you can't have analytics without following and followers. And this is a question I get often as a freelance communication strategist is, how many followers should I have? What should my ratio be? And this is really dependent on your Twitter goals. So for example, academic recognition, other academics aren't your audience unless you're trying to get a job, tenure, or a position within a research organization. And as a PhD student, this is very much where my Twitter strategy falls because I'm trying to get a job and go on the job market in the fall. So I'm trying to connect with academics. However, if you have been in the field for a long time, you might be looking for something like publicity, where the number and type of followers matter, and you should be actively trying to cultivate a following. You should also consider following journalists, public information officers, university stratcom teams, so people that can help promote your research outside of your own Twitter followers. If for example, you're looking at something like community conversation where the ratio doesn't matter, or community conversation, which is something like wanting to connect with people in your community to help create resources, the ratio doesn't matter as much, if at all. What's important is the amount of people that you feel like you can connect with and the people that are replying. So those engagements matter than the actual number of followers. And for this, you want to follow tastemakers, community leaders, local trends. You should be paying attention to local news and setting news alerts. All right, so tweeting strategy. This is one of my favorite things, is that Twitter is quantity over quality. And I know that that feels very strange as academics. It's like, man, but we like put so much, or people, like not just academics, researchers, practitioners, we put a lot of effort into the projects that we're doing. So it feels very strange to like tweet a lot. However, Twitter is fickle, and it's the biggest thing on Twitter is to be consistent. You want to tweet a consistent amount of times every week, and you want to tweet often enough that people begin to recognize you and the content that you're producing. But and so quality matters, or it's quantity over quality. However, we don't want to be the main character on Twitter. And so what is the main character? Main characters are people that go viral for the wrong reasons. There is a internet axiom that every day on Twitter, there is a main character, and the goal is to never be it. And so what are some examples of main characters? I think this one is a great example from recently, where a politician tweeted about women being overeducated and underloved. And I didn't even see the original tweet. However, so many people that I follow were tweeting how they were overeducated and underloved that this tweet blew up. And if you also did not know that this was the origin of those, that is an example like a Twitter character going viral. But it's not just politicians that can be main characters. This is an economist who went viral in 2018 for suggesting that Amazon should replace local libraries to save taxpayers money. And so when we use Twitter for public scholarship purposes, we definitely want to stay in our areas of expertise and make sure that we are tweeting as if we're being interviewed by a journalist or a member of our university's strategic communications team. I don't know how many people would say out loud, like, to a reporter that local libraries should be replaced by Amazon. And so it becomes very important to really consider the words that we're using. And then if you want to know if a tweet is perhaps going to go viral for the wrong reasons, pay attention to the ratio of retweets to quote tweets to likes. And so in the example on the bottom, it was only retweeted 211 times, but 7,400 people had something to say about this tweet and less than 700 liked the tweet. And that's generally an indication that this is not something that is being widely well received. And so how do we create something that's well received? The easiest way to do that is to build a narrative. And so when we think about Twitter, it's about cultivating relationships. And to do that, you can tell stories. If you do tell stories, sometimes these tend to go for multiple threads. Remember to number those threads. And then tweet the headline, quote, and so what of research and expertise. So one advice that I get often as a PhD student is to include the so what of my research. Your tweets should be the so what's of your research, and then the results that you found. And we really want to entice someone to come interact with our expertise and our knowledge through what we're tweeting. The other advice that I would give you is to use links outside of Twitter sparingly and strategically. If we think about social media companies like Twitter, they're ultimately a business that makes more money from advertising the longer that someone stays on the app. And so Twitter, for example, deprioritizes content that causes users to leave the app. And so if you're going to tweet about a publication that you just had, try tweeting without the link and with the link and see which ones get more engagement. I would also encourage you to understand the difference between a tweet and a reply and a quote tweet, and to use them each strategically. So here's a quick example on my profile. If you go through my tweets, I tweeted, when does a journalist become an influencer content creator? And people responded to that, but those don't show up in my profile or my responses to them. So for example, a friend of mine, Brian, responded and I responded to him, but those are not tweets that got a lot of attention or impressions. And so if I had responded something more intelligent than big facts, that would be something that I would maybe want to retweet, or I would want to tweet by itself so that it would gain a bigger audience. When we think about tweeting, we also want to make sure that we're being accessible in what we're doing. So when we go to when we go to tweet a photo, I would encourage you to always edit the photo for clarity and to pre-crop the photos to Twitter dimensions. I see this all the time with academics who tweet like graphs from their research, and the graph is getting cut off from the Twitter profile or the Twitter preview of the photo. And so what you can do is pre-crop your graphs so that they show up nicer, and this encourages more people to interact with them. The other thing is that you always want to use alternative text, which makes tweets accessible to screen readers and other accessibility tools. It also increases search engine optimization because those additional texts are used in the Twitter search algorithm. And if you go through a public scholar like Brené Brown, every single one of her photos tends to have the alternative text. And so I wanted to do a quick preview of what that looks like. So if you click on the Alt button on your photo, it'll bring you to this, and you can enter a description of what is happening in the photo. And then if you click edit, you can crop the media, and Twitter provides the crop sizes at the bottom, which is what those 3 squares are. And so next is, how do we know what to tweet? Tweets should be authentic to you. They should reflect your goals and your expert and personal brand. And I know that a lot of people have a lot of feelings about personal brand, but really a personal brand is the parts of yourself that you are willing to share with the public. It does not have to be your whole life. You can be very strategic about what your personal brand is. But by developing a personal brand, it allows you to interact with members of the media, organizations in much more purposeful and authentic ways. You should also be following high value accounts. So accounts that are very relevant to what you do, people you want to connect with. You should also set up alerts, hashtags related to your research and expertise. And you should also follow news and trending topics in your knowledge area. The other question I get often is, when do I tweet? And this is really dependent on your area of knowledge. You should Google your niche audience for their high Twitter use times. And so, for example, if you're trying to get a hold of a journalist, journalists work on average like 9 to 5. And so you want to tweet during that time. But say that your scholarship deals specifically with families, moms who have children tend to be on Twitter very early in the morning or late before or after dinner. And so when you tweet is really about who you're trying to reach. And you can find out this through Googling or also looking at when your contemporaries are tweeting. So is there a scholar who you really admire their public engagement work? See what their strategy is. The other thing that you can do is a self-audit. So what times of day do you get the most interactions? Look at your analytics page and see if there are certain tweets that do better. Like, do your tweets in the morning tend to fall flat because no one's had coffee yet? Or are the people you're trying to reach up very early? The other thing that you can do, and I always encourage with clients, is to experiment with A and B testing, which is where you tweet similar things at different times to see which ones do better. You can also do this with days of the week, the type of content that you're posting. And so the big thing about learning what's best for you is through practice and doing the work, because it's very easy to get stuck in the planning stage. I would really encourage you all to start sharing what you know on Twitter now and seeing what happens. There is a axiom in social media work where we say just post the draft, because you can spend forever making it look good, or you can get the information from doing it now. So content ideas and prompts. The other question that we tend to find ourselves really pondering is, well, what do I tweet? And so there are lots of ideas. You can legitimately Google ideas for Twitter content. HubSpot, influencer marketing people tend to have a million ideas. And so the big thing is that you want to recycle content from other areas. So if you are doing a writing for a grant, look at what parts of that grant might be useful to other people. And those are things that you can tweet. Some general ideas that I tend to give clients is to tell a story from your area of expertise. Consider questions that you've been asked and you've asked and been asked. I usually respond, or I usually really like this one, because when we find ourselves being asked all the time, well, why should I care about Twitter? Then I will like, I know that this is something that people want to know, and it's something that I can put out there. And so I would tweet, you should care about Twitter because with my expertise. The other thing that you can do is to think about your tweets by what their purpose is. So is this tweet helpful? Is this tweet meant to get people to interact with it? Or is this tweet for promotion? And so by putting your content into those categories, it becomes a lot easier to generate ideas. The other thing that you can do is to gather content inspiration. So again, do an internet search for Twitter prompts, write down those prompts and ideas that you find intriguing, and create a content calendar for social media ideas. I really like this post by Nazir on the 60 things to tweet when you go blank on Twitter, and I reference it regularly. And then here's an example of Twitter's own suggested social content calendar for brands. And this can be easily adapted for a public scholar. And this is highly Googleable, and this is recorded, so feel free to come back and look at this after we're done. I would also recommend that you use Twitter purposefully. So compare how much you liked creating a tweet with how it performed, and work towards making using Twitter easier. And so if it took a lot of time to create a tweet and nobody interacted with it, then that's not something we want to do again. But if we spent no time on one tweet and it has 15 or 20 interactions, then we want to take a closer look at why that tweet did well and if we want to keep doing it. The other thing is to set calendar notifications to check Twitter. So I have a little alarm that goes off that says, hey, scroll through Twitter, and I'll go through and like a couple tweets. And then I have an hour or two blocked off to decide what I'm doing with my Twitter content. And then you can also spend that time scheduling tweets. And so when you go to tweet, the little calendar with the clock on it is the schedule button. And if you click on it, you can then send that tweet later. It's very similar to the email snooze notification, or the email snoozes, or the send laters on like Microsoft Outlook. And then last, I'll leave you with a couple general tips, is that people who follow you can see what tweets you like. I cannot tell you the amount of times that I'm following someone who is a very well-known scholar or practitioner, and it says like so-and-so liked this tweet, and I go look at the tweet and it's very inappropriate, maybe casually racist or sexist. And so remember that everything you do on Twitter is seen by people you follow, and we want to be very careful about those things. Also, don't geotag tweets from your home or office. I am a big proponent of public safety and making sure that we're being intentional with our use of technology. And it is a huge safety risk to geotag from places that we don't want our potentially thousands of followers to know, such as our home office, exactly where our office is on campus. And then last, we want to treat Twitter like a professional group chat. It is very easy to either treat Twitter like a diary, or to use it in a very stiff, like I have done X research. And it needs to be somewhere in the middle. We want to show our personalities, but we also want to maintain our professionalism. And so when we use Twitter, it is about being purposeful and strategic. And thank you so much. Any questions that you have, feel free to follow me on Twitter, or send me an email. I am so thankful for Relevate for asking me to go over Twitter today. Thanks.
Thank you so much, LaRissa. We have a few minutes for questions. So if you want to put a question in the chat, I also think we're a small enough group that you're okay to unmute and ask any questions. But while you're thinking of questions or forming your thoughts, I did have one from a private message. So LaRissa, can you talk about hashtags and if they're helpful for like getting more engagements, or if it's like, are hashtags helpful for getting engagements?
Yes and no. So you don't want to put like 15 hashtags on your tweet, because that generally, Twitter knows what you're doing and they deprioritize those tweets. And so we want to use them strategically. So what's a good example? If you regularly interact with a specific conference, like use their tweet or their hashtags. The other thing that you can use hashtags for is the reaction that you're having. So if you go to tweet something and you are very excited, you could do a hashtag excited to convey a feeling, which is another way that hashtags are used. I think that when you are responding to events, so for instance, if your research has to do or with like the Roe v. Wade news, that might be an instance where you want to use a hashtag to get your tweet in front of more people. But you want to use hashtags with the idea that people are searching for that hashtag. So full words, what is someone who is going to be looking for my content searching for on Twitter?
Awesome, thank you. Question in the chat, how do we follow a hashtag and how do we find what hashtags we can use?
Oh man, that is a whole other presentation. So you can create alerts for specific hashtags on your Twitter account. And if you send me an email, I will find a resource that will walk you through how to do that. But for instance, like I really like the Kansas City Chiefs football team. And so I follow the hashtag Kansas City Chiefs hashtag. And so when they have a game or something, I can scroll through that hashtag and see what's happening and what people think about the game, what's going on. And so there are ways to follow specific hashtags. To decide what hashtags to use, it's highly dependent on your area. Can I ask, Georges, what is your area of research or expertise? Developmental psychology. And so when you say developmental psychology, what specifically about it? Right. So creativity, parenting, emerging adulthood. One thing that you could do is follow the hashtag parenthood, you can follow hashtag parenthood. And then when you tweet, you can have a specific phrase that you use. For example, Brené Brown is very big on shame and vulnerability. And so when she tweets, she has specific phrases that she uses with her audience. To be able to find hashtags that are useful, I would go look at trending topics related to family, and I would see which hashtags are being used by accounts that have lots of followers. So for instance, is there a content creator who's a mom who is using specific hashtags? One example would be like gentle parenting, is a hashtag that I see all the time that's used. And if that's your research area, it might be useful to follow gentle parenting to see if there are things that you can interact with there. And so really it takes time, but that's part of the strategy, is who are you trying to reach and what are they searching for?
Awesome. Okay, last question for LaRissa before we turn over to Abbie. How often would you recommend posting if we want to gain more traction, but are not someone who posts that often right now?
So it's not necessarily how often, but that you're consistent in that oftenness. So it's not about how many times a week, it's that you always tweet at least twice a week, if that makes sense. Or you always tweet on Mondays, or you're tweeting consistently about a specific topic. If you're not currently posting that often, you might burn yourself out if you try to go from like 0 to 100. You might just make it a goal to tweet once a week for the next 6 weeks and see how that feels, and then reevaluate what your strategy is, and then do 2 or 3 times a week. There is no need to be a power user, but you want to tweet consistently enough that if somebody goes to your profile, your last tweet was within the last 30 days. That's what I would recommend to start with.
Awesome. Thank you so much, LaRissa. This has been awesome. I personally learned so much from you. Feel free to keep putting questions in if they come up, and we can see if there's time at the end, or LaRissa can send you resources after it's over.
Thank you so much.
All right. So now let's talk to Abbie. Abbie is someone who's actually doing this work as a scholar. I've prepared some questions for a conversation. So I'll be asking Abbie questions and sharing with us, and then we'll have a Q&A time for you to ask Abbie your own questions. So first, Abbie, how did you first get involved with using Twitter as a scholar?
On mute. So I actually was kind of, I wasn't totally on board initially when a lot of my colleagues and friends were using it, but I was part of the Association of Women in Psychology's leadership program, which is a 2-year program, which is really wonderful. And I really sort of got interested through talking to colleagues there and some of the instructors who were talking about, you're all these women leaders and you should be really using your research to have an impact. And Twitter is one way to make your scholarship more public and to potentially broaden your reach. So I started experimenting, I think late 2017. I thought, okay, I just thought I'll give it a try. And again, I didn't really want another thing, but I realized it could be a potentially useful platform to leverage technology to reach a bigger audience. And also part of my motivation was actually to uplift other voices. So I was actually initially very interested in, this wasn't something LaRissa talked about, but sort of figuring out, who wasn't getting maybe the attention or the interest that they deserved. So I was kind of intrigued by the idea of helping other people, especially emerging scholars, to develop, more of a platform and more visibility.
Awesome. What are some of the benefits, either professional or personal, you have experienced engaging on Twitter as a scholar?
So I should say, I was thinking about this and I wrote down a whole bunch, but, for me, engaging with scholars around the world, as well as just people around the world, people who I wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to learn from or to engage with on topics that I am interested in. And those include for me, professional topics, but there's also things that I just like to kind of learn about. It's helpful for me to learn about research in areas that are my primary areas, but since I'm probably going to learn about those things anyway through Google Scholar and other means, I'm actually more likely to use Twitter to learn about things that I actually don't know as much about. So as an example, I started following a lot of disability activists because I was really interested in disability activism. It's not a primary area of research of mine, but it's something that I'm genuinely interested in. I use it to share information about my research, my publications, my books, to inform, current debates. So, during COVID, I started doing a lot of research. Yes, I will definitely do that. I did start, so I'm thinking about COVID, a lot of people were speculating about, does COVID causing divorce? And I had just finished doing a lot of work showing, that books were, about divorce and splitting up and going through divorce during COVID. So I sort of use that as an opportunity to try to, educate and inform. I also think it's been incredibly helpful for journalists to find me. So a lot of journalists that I know of do actually look through hashtags. So I often hashtag things like adoption or families or LGBT because I have found that journalists will kind of search through those hashtags to identify folks who can speak on particular topics. So journalists find me, and I have been able to find authors for books that I'm editing through Twitter, which has been really, really helpful. So, saying I'm, spreading the word, I'm editing the Encyclopedia of Trans Studies with this other scholar, and, we're seeking, submissions on A, B, and C topics has been really helpful. And I've connected with potential collaborators. So I'm actually editing a different book with somebody who I met on Twitter, which is amazing, but who's in a totally different area than I did. But again, this is a person who was using Twitter so effectively that I saw her and was very interested in what she was doing and invited her to join me as a junior scholar who could hopefully certainly lend a lot of expertise and I could certainly learn from, but I knew this would be a great opportunity for her to be a co-editor of a book. So, and I will say, I think there's a lot of benefits for emerging scholars for reasons like that. If you're using it effectively, people in your field will notice and they'll say, oh, I really want to, that this person's really interesting. They're doing really interesting work. I'd love to learn more about them. And then you might get contacted, offline about your work.
Yeah, it sounds like a ton of connections, like professionally, but also like learning and just like LaRissa was saying, like so much of like Twitter is like relationships and connecting. I think that's really cool. You've connected with so many people. What are some of the challenges you've experienced engaging on Twitter as a scholar?
Well, I've definitely experienced challenges. Of course, when you put something out there, you don't really know what the reaction is going to be. So at times people will respond to tweets that are, I think, off topic or unproductive or just sometimes argumentative. Sometimes people ask me to engage in debates that are very peripheral to what I'm actually talking about. So for example, if I'm posting about the, negative effects of the Don't Say Gay legislation, somebody might pipe in with some off-topic question or comment, which again, isn't so offensive as that I would block them, but it's just not really adding to the conversation in a way that is meaningful or productive. Sometimes people have used sort of my tweets as an opportunity to weigh in on things that, they're fine, but I don't have any control over them. And I'm not really, I've become the target of some people's dismay. So as an example, in this example of soliciting submissions for an encyclopedia, I did get a fair number of reactions, I think a couple, of people saying, there's all these problems with the academic publishing and you should pay people. And I agree, we should pay people, but I don't have control over the academic publishing system. So that's some examples of times where I'm like, well, I'm sorry, but no. So I don't really want to engage in those debates. They're for a different day and a different topic. But I did think that was one, certainly a negative thing. Also, LaRissa didn't really talk about this, but some people use Twitter for recruiting research participants. I found that to be very risky because of the number of bots and kind of fakers that you can get. So if you are going to go that route, know what you're doing. And I strongly recommend using a different link for your survey so that you can try, and you can figure out how to do this if you use Qualtrics or any other system. Have a different link that you put out on Twitter so you can actually monitor which responses come from Twitter, because often they will be, different than the ones you might get through more legitimate means. A final kind of challenge is that people follow me for different reasons. So some people might follow me for one strand of research and another group of people follow me for a different strand. So I do sometimes wonder, some of these people must be very confused because they're following me about my research on trans students. And, I also post, say, about child welfare and adoption. So.
Awesome. Yeah, I recently had a lot of spammy answers from Twitter recruiting. And if you're going to do it, don't put gift card or a dollar amount in your text of your tweet post. And yes, I love the idea of having a separate link. And yeah, as you become bigger in conversations, there's always pushback from, people who may, I don't know, be trolls or may just have different opinions about what you're saying.
Yeah, and so I think part of the challenge of Twitter is learning whether you're going to, engage in these debates with people, or do you want to just let something fall? And if you're going to engage in a public debate, how are you going to do that? And you can, of course, always turn notifications off, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing if things are just getting out of control.
Yes. So how do you practically balance managing your Twitter presence with all of your other professional and personal responsibilities?
Yeah, I really think I'm not actually the best because I do take breaks. I do try to tweet a couple times a week, and certainly if there's a big event happening, there's legislation happening that I have something to weigh in on, which I certainly want to do, then I will engage more often. But I just have generally pretty low expectations for myself. I tweet it when I have something to say, but try not to just take up, space just for the sake of taking up space. I've also tried to follow some things that I think make Twitter a more pleasant space for me personally. So, I like seeing pictures of nature photography and animals. So for me, that's one of the ways that I balance it. I don't want to really only be following academics. That is primarily why, or scholars and such. That's the primary motivator, but it's not the only reason I want to stay on Twitter. So.
Awesome. And then my last question for you is, do you have any advice for scholars or new professionals who are starting to build a professional network or presence on Twitter?
Yeah, I think following people you're interested in and engaging with their posts. So, liking their posts, retweeting them, that shows that you're engaged, which is going to draw attention from them. You're not necessarily going to have, say, a lot of research to share at this point, but you can still share other people's research or news articles or whatever with your own take, your own kind of summary. You can do a great, one thing that's really useful that people seem to really like on Twitter is when someone sort of summarizes something or provides a list of, tips, for example, or take home points. So you can sometimes play a role in that realm by, retweeting someone's research and posting their 3 takeaway points, especially if they didn't do that very effectively. Sharing updates and milestones with your followers. I've seen like graduate students and junior scholars do that with a lot of effect, and that's one great way to get people to kind of notice you. Those seem to get quite a lot of likes. When you got into graduate school, you just defended your dissertation, you're gathering data, you reached some milestone, you moved into your first apartment at graduate school, all those things I've seen. They're ways of just sort of gathering and connecting with other folks that are at a similar level in the playing field as you. So,
yeah. Awesome. I love it. Okay, well, we can open it up to if you have any questions for Abbie. One came in the chat. How do you negotiate following individuals or organizations from a variety of perspectives? So you're saying tweets from all sides with potential negative backlash.
That's a really good question. Yeah, I probably purposely don't follow certain people with really diverse opinions. Those things tend to be the things that I might see because somebody retweets them with a comment, but I don't actively go out and seek people that I have strongly disagree with them. Is that the question? I don't know. I definitely try to see different perspectives on a particular issue. So for example, I don't want to follow a lot of politicians that I strongly disagree with. That's just me. But I do want to see, I study adoption. I follow lots of birth parents, adoptive parents, adopted individuals, right? I follow some social workers. So I'm getting the kind of adoption triad, the adoption sphere from a lot of different perspectives, because that's a topic that I'm genuinely interested in. So that's where I am actively going after knowledge from multiple sort of perspectives. But, do I care what, so-and-so politician is saying about this topic? I'm sure I'll hear about it. I don't want to follow them necessarily, but other people feel differently.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like what you were saying earlier about some level of like self-care of like, I don't need to be exposed to like anti-human rights messaging, and like you gotta know what like you can do to stay informed, but also not be like just like destroyed by seeing like really hateful things.
And I'm sure LaRissa probably has many tips about this, but there are some people that I've stopped following just because I found their content to be just not what I wanted to see. And I'm not saying, don't be negative, but there was definitely a few people where it just was too much for me. I just, found myself kind of not wanting to read their tweets. So
yeah, it gets really draining. LaRissa said in the chat, have personal Twitter rules, like if their content is too much, just go ahead and unfollow them and don't feed the trolls. Yes, love it. What other questions do people have for Abbie?
Yeah, I have enough experience with trolls, even going back to, paper trolls where people would send me things to my mailbox at work. So I don't engage predominantly with that unless it's in a mediated setting, radio show or that sort of thing.
I do have one, Dr. Goldberg. If you had one piece of advice to scholars who want to use Twitter to great effect, what would it be? Like, what is one thing that you would recommend?
Yeah, one place I've seen it be really effective is, I'm thinking about junior scholars, even graduate students, using, again, as I mentioned, an opportunity to engage with people whose work they're interested in. And some folks have, again, come to contribute to stuff that I'm editing because I knew them from Twitter. So when they wrote to me and said, oh, I'm actually doing research in X, Y, and Z, and I'd love to contribute something, and here are some of the people that I work with, I had a frame of reference to understand, oh, okay, this name is familiar. I've seen what they're posting. It's all very appropriate and interesting. They've got, a nice emerging professional presence, but they also have good boundaries. So I know enough about them and I've seen them that it's actually, it feels, it's a little, closer than a stranger kind of contacting me out of the blue. So I think, engaging professionally, respectfully, in an interested and curious way, I think is really great. Replying to somebody's tweets, retweeting it, sort of thing.
Thank you so much. That I know you from Twitter. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
We can wrap it up with one last question. What motivates you to stay involved on Twitter as a scholar?
I mean, to be honest, it's a lot of it is I've had some really great connections that I've formed. And I think to a couple people chimed in the chat, one thing that I think is so useful that I didn't mention, but others I'm thankful did, is it's where you learn about a lot of events, job opportunities. Sorry, that's the doorbell. Job opportunities. It's a place where you can, spread information about a conference that you're organizing, as somebody said, a symposium. Great idea about external reviewers, right? That, that's one way that you can kind of spread your, who you are to kind of a much broader group of folks. I think too, to my point about I know you from Twitter, sometimes people have followed me on Twitter and have kind of then introduced themselves, say at a conference or in another setting. And it's a point of connection, right? It's something that makes it easier I think it makes it easier for them to say, could you have coffee or something like that? So that's happened as well. You feel like you know somebody a little bit better, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. All right, well, thank you so much, Abbie, for sharing all of that amazing insight. I love hearing people who are like on the ground doing stuff, like the lived experience of it. So thank you so much for sharing with us. It is time to wrap up. So if I wanted to give a plug, if you follow Relevate's Twitter, I will follow you back and uplift your things. We love posting and retweeting when people share public scholarship about their research. So go ahead and follow us if you would like, and we'll uplift what you're doing. Thank you, Abbie and LaRissa. I personally learned a lot from you and hope now we can go practice what we learned today. And yeah, if you have any questions, you can email me. You can reach out to LaRissa or Abbie, I'm sure on Twitter, they'd be okay with that. But otherwise, yeah, we'll see you on Twitter, I guess, as someone put in the chat. And I will be emailing you a follow-up email with information and the recording of this. So thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day.